Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another New Jersey Constitutional Republicans virtual conversation. It's my great pleasure today to welcome Eric Apert. Eric, thank you for joining me today.
Good to be here, JR. Thanks for having me.
Eric, give our audience a little bit of background on yourself and tell us a little bit about where you're from and your education, and let's get you familiar with our audience.
Okay. Well, I'm a Jersey guy. I grew up in Bergen County, Glen Rock High School, class of '08. Started in Jersey politics, interning at a young age, was interested in this and went to school at GW down in DC. First gig on the Hill was with John Runyon on his first day there. So that was a fun and neat experience and learned a lot. Ended up working for the RGA, Republican Governors Association, while I was there. And then ended up on a congressional race out of New York 1, Long Island, for a guy named Randy Altshuler, who was running against Tim Bishop. It's now the seat held by Lee Zeldin. In 2013, Jersey beckoned me home, and I moved to Burlington County, which was a great place to learn. I worked in government as a public information officer, and then ultimately their deputy county administrator, working with some great folks down there like Gene Stanfield, Ryan Peters, and some of our great freeholders that we had down there. And because I'm a glutton for punishment, after 4 years of that, I went to law school at Emory University in Atlanta, worked for the legislature down there in Georgia for a little while, which was a different experience, and then got the call from Jack Ciattarelli to be his campaign manager for this 2021 cycle. I was honored to do that and glad to be a part of Jack's team to help fix our home state here.
Great. And Eric, now just because you worked for offensive lineman, a fine offensive lineman, John Runyon, that doesn't mean that you're an Eagles fan now, does it?
No. I would have been kicked out of my house had I been an Eagles fan growing up. I am a proud Giants, go Big Blue. Which
that's it.
Doesn't always give us something to be proud of.
New York football Giants.
What I love about the Giants and Eagles, and certainly I worked in Burlington, so I was in Eagles territory, but what you love about Eagles and Giants, when you go to a game and it's split about 50-50, and there's a lot of chatter between the two fans, but when they flash the score up and the Cowboys are losing, everybody cheers. So
yeah,
that's when you know.
Yeah, we unify against the Cowboys, but Eric, it's been the Eagles have owned us for years up until this year, and it's been painful. I mean, our Super Bowl for Giant fans south in southern Jersey has been when we play the Eagles, and we at least got to beat the Eagles, but it's been tough the last few years, but I think we're turning the tide. I think we're going to have a good team this year.
I hope
now,
so.
Now tell us about your days at George Washington University, and you were a major. Were you a political science major there?
Yep. Yeah. Political science. Look, I enjoyed it. Really in the heart of DC. I'm a history nerd and politics, kid. And so there was no better place to be to walk past the White House and the Lincoln Memorial on your way to class. Gave a good perspective. So miss DC.
That's excellent. Now I understand that they have one of the better political science programs, producing a lot of young men and women who get hired by campaigns throughout the country. Is that
That's true?
It's one of the better.
They've got a good program there. They've got a master's program too. Our communications director, Stami Williams, also comes out of the GW. Not undergrad, but master program. And she was an adjunct professor there as well. So we've got a little GW crew. But yeah, they've got a good program, and I was honored and lucky, fortunate. But really the opportunity, I mean, the greatest opportunity of going to school there is the chance to intern and work in DC. So everybody I knew that I went to school with that came out with something on their resume. It's what I tell kids now when we have interns and folks going to school is put some on the resume. It always helps on the way out to land a gig. And I was fortunate again to work in John Runyon's office and learn a lot there, and then ultimately parlay that into my future and now with Jack.
Right. Now, in the curriculum, you were studying political theory, obviously. We've been talking about the political theory of the American founding. And we've been discussing and educating the citizens on what exactly the political theory of the American founding was. You know, we hear a lot about who influenced the founders, John Locke, Montesquieu, Cicero historically, and of course, the Greek philosophers, Aristotle, and so forth. But what actually was their political theory? That's what we've been discussing. What was discussed down as the curriculum down in George Washington regarding political theory? Did you get Wilson's view along with Madison's view, or give us just a little bit of background on what you were taught down there?
Obviously, you haven't looked at my transcripts, but but no, we did. That's a joke. We did certainly, and cover the spectrum, and obviously depended on the professor. But the piece that I think
Right.
is so important, in my view, and that
Right.
we could wade through, is that it's an experiment, and that I think
Yes.
that gets taken for granted now. It's a vast and grand experiment in self-governance. I love
Yes.
Churchill's line that democracy is the worst form of government except everyone else we've ever tried. And so, even a broken democracy is the second best type of governance. And
Uh-huh.
so we've got a lot of work to do to fix and heal our democracy. But I think it's important to remember that it's an experiment, right? It's a republic if we can keep it. And
Yes.
that I think is a with that perspective and approaching governance with that perspective, that we can't take it for granted. And each generation needs to work to, and I know the work you're doing, JR, it's so important to uphold the ideals of our Constitution. See, I knew coming here, I got my little Constitution trustee
Oh,
I'll carry around.
very
So
good, Eric.
I
Yep.
want to break
You're
it
good.
out.
That's great. If you're going to talk to the New Jersey Constitution Republicans, you better have your Constitution and you better read it and know it. And we'll talk a
Exactly.
little bit about it later.
Exactly. Exactly.
Because remarkably, we have a lot of representatives who you are well aware of who actually haven't read the Constitution. They do not know the responsibilities of the office they seek to hold. And
Yep.
this is a big problem. You know, we talk about the experiment, and that's a good segue into
Yeah.
what we want to talk about in representatives knowing, you know, what was the actual political theory of the founding, who the men who created these documents that we still use today, and the fact that we've moved further away from them has a lot to do with the inefficacy of government and why it's not working the way it should.
Agreed. I know we're going to talk about the governor later on, but I think this
Yeah.
segues into it. When you have a governor who says that the Bill of Rights is above his pay grade, as if it's some antiquated writing that he didn't bother to think about. It's in times of emergency that our founding documents are most important,
That's
not
right.
least important. They're not something that we don't have the luxury of thinking about. We need our leaders to be founded and grounded in those principles, because it's exactly in times of adversity that we can really foul up that experiment or strengthen it. And certainly that's a point of difference with this governor.
Absolutely. It's a good point. We're going to talk a little bit about that as well
I didn't mean to jump
later,
the
but
gun.
let's talk.
Too easy.
No, that's fine. We're having a good conversation. That's what it's all about. Now, tell us a little bit about Eric Apert in law school. Now, you got your degree?
I got my degree. Got my degree was on the law review down in Emory, and really, again, a great education, learning how to read and write. You're reading more than anything in law school. You're reading, and you're reading some of the greatest writers, particularly when you're in the Supreme Court cases, that have ever lived or written
Right.
about our institutions.
Mhm.
So I really enjoyed it, loved Atlanta. But again, Jersey was home, and it was just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in. And I really wouldn't have done this for anybody but Jack Ciattarelli. We had, and I know we'll talk more about him, but in Burlington, we had supported Jack in 2017. And so I got to see Jack speak to a senior group in Delran, New Jersey. It's a great little blue collar town, largely Democrat.
Mhm.
I heard Jack was going to speak about the school funding formula, and I heard he was going to give a PowerPoint presentation. I thought, these people are going to be asleep. And I watched as he riveted them and taught them about how, with a PowerPoint, about how
Yeah.
school funding formula means that your $300,000 home pays more in property taxes than an $800,000 unit in Hoboken, and they get free pre-K, and you don't.
Yeah.
And twice. They stood up and cheered, and he said, "Here's how I'm going to fix it. I'm a CPA and small businessman. Here's how I'm going to fix it." And I thought, wow, this guy's got it. And so when the call from his team and from Jack came in, I said, "All right, I'll pack my bags. I'm coming home." But law school, I recommend it. Great way to organize thoughts, way to write, way to learn about the Constitution and our founding documents, because that's certainly where it all starts from.
Right. And what area of law do you find most interesting? Did you find yourself gravitating towards a certain type of law, constitutional law?
Certainly loved
or
constitutional
privacy?
law. I certainly love constitutional law. I spent one summer on the Third Circuit as an intern, and then I spent my last summer actually in the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office, standing up cases in local municipal court in Philadelphia, which was quite an experience and an opportunity to be on my feet. The second year, you can qualify to try cases, not try, but to stand them up with the support of an ADA, assistant district attorney. So yeah, criminal law, which again lines up with constitutional law, and that development over time is certainly something I was interested in.
Right. And certainly you learned about in law school, you learned about the two schools, which are basically split up between what we know as originalism or textualism. Then, of course, the idea of an evolving, living document view of the Constitution, which really means words are changing, whereas the originalist view means words are very, very important, as Justice Scalia said, and they hold their meaning. And one thing that you'll find interesting, Eric, is that we use the 1828 Noah Webster's dictionary, online dictionary, to get the definition of the words as the founders understood the words. But did you run into that those two schools of thought in law school?
Yeah, certainly. There's a lot. I mean, a great deal is spent on that, and read a lot of Scalia. Really, it comes down to what sources, when judges are trying to determine the meaning of a law, what sources you can use. So are you just using the text, or is something that a senator said on the floor applicable, or even something that they consider? And so you learn a lot about that, and you do get to, the other neat thing about it is you're surrounded by people who have similar interests, who are well-read, who are reading the same things as you are. And so the opportunity, even though, look, the other thing I'll say, and it's true, I think, of a lot of our higher ed universities and college campuses, there was not a day that a professor didn't, make his or her political ideology known, usually in the form of a derogatory comment about the current president. And so it's not the bastion of free discussion in the classroom that it should be or could be, based on that. And that's unfortunate. We lose out on good points of view. But I still found an opportunity to find people to talk to and learn a lot.
Right. And one of the things that we discuss a lot, Eric, is the fact that what has really occurred in the Supreme Court, and it's been occurring in the New Jersey Supreme Court for many decades now, and that is really the idea of judicial restraint. As opposed, and try to flesh this out for the audience, if you could, just a little bit.
Sure.
The idea of judicial restraint, which we see a lot with Justice Roberts, and we see especially with the New Jersey Supreme Court, in giving deference to the executive and to the legislative branches, and really not even doing what was originally intended of the court, which the great John Marshall advocated and really created, which is the idea of judicial review, that all legislation should be reviewed by the court in lieu of its constitutionality. And that's kind of gotten away from. So tell us a little bit about that. And that's what was one of the areas I'm sure you studied.
It's a founding principle. The neat thing about court history is it's largely what they've created, right? I mean, that comes out of Marbury v. Madison. And in a large way, that's Marshall solving a problem with some legal jujitsu, right, and philosophical jujitsu. Not that it's not valuable, but it's and then it came to guide our courts. But you're right, we do see that trend. One of the, I'll just as an aside on John Marshall, one of the stories I like, it used to be that the justices rotated, and he wanted to have some cohesion on the court. And one of the ways he did that was by having most of them live together and by ordering in crates of wine, which maybe we should all try as a way to get more done. But you're right, and we do see that in New Jersey. Look, we saw it most recently when the governor wanted to borrow $4 billion, and Jack Ciattarelli and his family went into their own pocket and sued the governor to say that's unconstitutional. In our Constitution, you can't balance the budget on borrowing. That case had been won. A very similar case had been won in 2004, Lance v. McGreevey. This time, it went 7-0 in favor of the governor against Jack. 7-0. 4 of those justices, by the way, appointed by Governor Christie, on the theory that the governor could do anything he needed with the money, including build a stadium. Right. That's what the government's own lawyer acknowledged, including build a stadium under the COVID emergency powers. That's wholly created. And not something that we've seen. Again, it breaks against the Lance v. McGreevey tradition. And now we know once the governor rolled out his budget, we knew that it was all smoke and mirrors. He never needed the $4 billion. We've got a surplus. The federal government has sent us money. Those bonds are not repayable in the best way possible. And so even Senate President Steve Sweeney said, we made a mistake borrowing this money. Well, Jack Ciattarelli knew it was a mistake, and he sued to stop it. And was defeated by the courts in this country, in this state. So one of the things that Jack is most excited about is if he were to be elected, he can appoint a new majority on the court, or at least 3 justices. So it's an opportunity to fix what is a unfortunate situation here in New Jersey. And again, it's broken. I mean, ultimately, it's proof that the Democrats currently control all 3 branches of our state government. And the people of New Jersey have to ask themselves, are they better off for it? The legislature has been controlled by the Democrats for decades. And every resident's got to ask themselves, are we better off? And if not, give change a chance. If you want to change, you got to make a change. So.
And to show you, Eric, how entrenched that the New Jersey Supreme Court was in their judicial restraint, the philosophy of judicial restraint, we also had our great friend and my good compatriot, I consider him like a brother, Senator Michael Testa here, down in Legislative District 1. He also argued this case,
participated in that law.
And he also, so they were both, we had 2 fine lawyers making the case against the constitutionality, which is clearly it's unconstitutional, as the New Jersey Constitution clearly identifies it as being unconstitutional, but because of a perceived crisis, we can, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more too, we can suspend the Constitution, which has been unprecedented in relations to this epidemic, and we'll touch on that a little bit before. But
you're exactly right, and I think it just harkens back to what we said about the governor saying Bill of Rights is above my pay grade, which is when you go to law school, the other thing that is supposed to be guiding in judicial opinion making is precedent, right? First and foremost, precedent. It's supposed to provide stability. Again, Lance v. McGreevey provides almost direct precedent. We had the same lawyer, Mark Sheridan and Jay Weber, who argued the case in 2004 and won. So similar facts, same lawyer, different court, 7-0. It's against precedent. And and this goes back to the point, at times of crisis, it's when we don't take this and rip it up. It's when we default to it. And that's got our guiding principle. It's our rock.
That's right. That's right. And Eric, what also is very disappointing is that the court seemed to have made up its mind even before they heard the arguments. And that's very unfortunate, because there needs to be more deliberating, first of all, in the legislative branch. But the Supreme Court needs to defend the Constitution and not acquiesce to the perceived powers of the executive powers. They need to defend the Constitution and not defend the non-enumerated right of an executive order or working within a crisis. But it certainly seemed that that court had already made up its mind. And I think a 7-0 decision is indicative that they truly did have their mind made up prior to the arguments given. And that's very unfortunate.
Yeah, look, I can't speak to the minds of the justices, but what I can tell you is we now know it was a mistake. And even those who voted for it admit it was a mistake. It was unnecessary, and it will cost generations of New Jerseyans millions and millions of dollars at a point when we can barely afford that. We've got a property tax crisis. We've got a business climate crisis. It's far too hard to start your own small business and lift yourself into the middle class or out of poverty or into a hyper class. And the statistic I hate more than anything is that of all the states in the union, we are the worst in the number of kids that are educated here, that go away to college, and the fewest come back. The fewest come back. So from an economic standpoint, what that means is we've spent all of this money, more money than anyone else in the country, educating our kids. I've benefited from it. And then they're starting their careers, creating jobs, and buying homes out of state and stimulating other economies. And the brain drain there is horrible. On a human level, what it means is that the very Jersey story that I experienced of my parents grew up in the town next door, aunts and cousins and uncles and grandparents were around, doesn't happen. Those are my friends and my cousins leaving. And so if we want to fix that, and if I want my kids to have the type of family dynamic that I had and the type of New Jersey that I knew, we need to fix that, and we need to fix it now. And that's why I think a small businessman CPA is so important to get us back to that. But it's a real problem. And again, so to add debt needlessly on top of that only makes matters worse. Only makes matters worse. And those problems, just to be fair, those problems didn't start with Governor Murphy, but he's made them worse. He's made them worse.
No question. Now, before we get into talking about our great friend Jack, Eric, tell us how you became. Tell us the process. Tell how it all came about to where you became the campaign manager for Ciattarelli for governor 2021.
Yeah, I started, like I said, I started early. I'll tell a joke that I tell. It's true. My first time as a campaign manager, I was a sophomore in high school. It was 2006, and they asked my dad to run for town council in Glen Rock. His idea of campaigning was having dinner at the Glen Rock Inn 2 nights a week. And when we lost, and Glen Rock's now become a Democratic town, but we're going to fix that this year. When we lost, and he to this day says he was poorly staffed, and I said I had a weak candidate. So there's a there's a good rub.
Rough
there.
language.
Yeah. But no, we're great. And so I started early. I was into this. I was blessed in that I knew what I wanted and knew what I was into. And so I was in law school after working in Burlington County, which was a great place to learn. 40,000 more Democrats than Republicans, and yet for years, over a decade, the Republicans, despite that voter disadvantage, won. They provided good governance. Good governance is good politics, and they ran effective and proficient campaigns under guys like Len Paulson and Bill Layton and others, and found great candidates, promoted women, promoted folks with different views. And so it was a fantastic place to learn both about government and politics. And so when I was sitting in law school and got a call from Jack and said, would you be interested in this role? You know, Jack, very unfortunately, his campaign manager from 2017, Rick Rosenberg, sadly passed away shortly thereafter the campaign from a birth defect. And so Jack had been, and I knew Rick well and had liked, enjoyed working with him and was saddened by that. And so Jack had spent the next couple of years as not a candidate, but as a private citizen supporting the party, supporting candidates up and down the state, and was talking about running again. And so we needed to put a team together and fill that role. And I got the call. So I was in Atlanta, came up, met with Jack at a diner, and chatted with Jack for a while, and ultimately was offered the job and jumped at the opportunity. So I worked from Atlanta, finished my last semester. We announced in January. I graduated in May, and came back. I'd taken a 5-year gap between work, so I was older already, and came up and started full time. COVID obviously threw us in the pandemic, changed the course of our campaign in some ways, particularly early on when everything went remote and everything was totally shut down, and still does. You're not having the types of large gatherings town halls that you would see and expect. And so we've had to ramp up our digital presence. I'm sure people have seen us on TV now with our commercials, and find creative ways. We all have Zoom fatigue at this point, but and I look forward to getting together with you in person, JR. But so it's changed the course. But that's how I got it. And like I said, I started really young. And I'm glad I did.
Well, I'm certainly happy that Jack offered you the job, and I know you're doing a great job. And hopefully, we're going to bring home a victory. As you know, the New Jersey Constitutional Republicans have fully endorsed Jack Ciattarelli. And just let me tell you, Eric, when Jack came down to meet us in 2017 for his first go around in the primary, I, and as well as our fellow New Jersey Constitutional Republican participants, were very impressed with Jack Ciattarelli's ability, number one, to listen, not coming up and bloviating and thinking he knew it all, but he could actually listen to people who may be able to give him some good ideas and to support what he's doing. And that was immediately what struck me with Jack. We immediately had a rapport. The other thing that helped, of course, was our great admiration for one Abraham Lincoln and Jack's appreciation for the initial principles of the Republican Party, which is why we created this group. We believe that the Republican Party has moved too far into an area which could be described as a cult of personality rather than the principles that started the party. And Jack, of course, is right along in line with the restoration of those principles. And that's what makes him such a good candidate. We believe, Eric, that Jack can build coalitions like Abraham Lincoln did. Because of course we're going to be having to work with Democrats. We're going to have to be drawing in independents, but Jack can build these coalitions where other candidates are far too incendiary. They create the continued divide. They cause a lot of division and a lot of segregation, whereas Jack is very, very, he has that great acumen to be able to listen to others, and therefore makes him a good coalition builder.
Well, certainly I agree. Anybody who knows Jack knows you don't get through many conversations without a Lincoln story or a Lincoln quote, which is great. And that's great. I'm a big, as I said, a history nerd too, but although I can't quote him as proficiently as Jack can. But I think you're right. Look, Jack has won 7 elections in this state at the local and county and state level. I think that's important to understand how to fix our state. It's also been largely in places where Democrats outnumber Republicans, and he's won those not by compromising on his conservative constitutional common sense principles, but by doing exactly what you said, going everywhere and listening to everybody. I have a line, and I say it on the campaign, and it's true of Jack too. I don't have a monopoly on good ideas. So anybody who's got an idea should feel free to talk to me, and I want to hear from you. We want to be open. We really are trying to build something here that not only fixes our party, because there are many places in this state. So you talk about working with Democrats, and you're right, we want to work with everybody. But Jack was recently asked, how would you get along with Senate President Sweeney? And no offense to Senate President Sweeney, but Jack said, I'll get along great with civilian Steve Sweeney, because if he answers that question in the affirmative, what does that say to the guy running against Steve Sweeney, the Republican? We're not going to give up on him. We're going to work and fight and work up and down the state. There are places that we've lost that we need to win back. We need to Burlington County, Somerset County. We were closer than we need to be in Morris County. There are legislative districts that we can win. LD 11, we've got 3 fantastic women running for the legislature there. We were with them yesterday in Red Bank. And so there are real places we can win, but we do have to have a cohesive, common sense plan to fix the state and articulate that to folks. And to your point, not just be a party about grievance or personality. We have a forward-looking plan to fix our state. And that's what Jack's always had and always stands for. But yes, we will go to places where Republicans don't typically go. Now, we need to in order to win. There are 1 million more Democrats than Republicans in the state, but there are more unaffiliated voters. And so we need to go and find our job, and Jack's job as your gubernatorial candidate is to go and convince those folks and persuade those folks and talk to those folks and listen to them and explain that with a Republican governor and a Republican legislature, because again, all 140 seats are up this year, that we can make the types of changes that make New Jersey a place where people want to stay, where people want to come and move to and start a business, that can create jobs and lift the economy and do a whole host of other good things, right? What's Reagan's line? The best government program is a job.
That's right. And specifically too, Eric, when we talk about the initial Republican principles, and Jack understands this, what that means is we go back to the ideological basis of the Declaration of Independence. We go back to the ideals of the laws of nature and nature's God. We go back to the self-evident truth that all men are created equal, and therefore law must be equally applied to everyone uniformly. We also believe in the God-given unalienable rights of life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness as just a few of those rights. And we also talk about the consent of the governed. The people consent to be governed as long as the government is securing these rights. And we find now that the government has completely lost its way in regards to the purpose of government, which is essentially to secure the people's rights. Jack understands that. And Jack understands that those principles articulated in the Declaration that Lincoln articulated will resonate with the greater number of people. It will resonate with the independents. It should resonate with all Republicans, and it will even resonate with some what I call pre-progressive Democrats. But those principles, Eric, are eternal, and they perpetuate from generation to generation. Jack understands that, and that's why he can communicate those ideas to the people in the urban areas who are naturally conservative and who want to come back to the Republican Party. And by articulating the policies that come from the Declaration of Independence, we can grow the Republican Party once again.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And you see it, excuse me, you see it from those different areas of our state. You know, we saw a pretty scathing letter to the editor from Pastor Jefferson, who runs one of the largest churches in Newark, who criticized this governor for ignoring his parishioners and the city of Newark. You know, so again, it comes down to give us a chance, and that's what Jack says. Give us a chance, and you're right. Jack is taking those messages and articulating it, and those are messages that do resonate to everybody because they are universal. They are universal.
There's no question about that, Eric. Now, here, tell me about this challenge. So we have the challenge, especially as being Republicans in New Jersey. Last week, I believe there was a poll that came out that said Phil Murphy had a 58% approval rating. Now, I've said this, that the Democrats are very, very familiar with with turning voters off, if you will, in the respect of polling. And they utilize polling really to affect elections, to demoralize Republicans, to make independents want to stay out of the fray or even vote Democrat. But real voter suppression, Eric, is the way the Democrats manipulate the polls. So what do we have to do in New Jersey to get more accuracy and to get more people knowing, Jack, that he is by far the best representative that we could to elect to be our governor?
So I'll take those in two parts. First, on that poll, no offense to the folks who did it at Stockton, and I know some of them and they're great folks, but it's the same outfit. You mentioned Mike Testa that had him 19 points down 2 days before Election Day, and we know what happened in his district. So these polls are skewed. But we also know from the poll, when we just look at the top lines and from other polls that are out there, that Governor Murphy's support has fallen and that it's soft, that most people pre-pandemic didn't know who he was. And this is directly tied to a perception of his, from seeing him on TV every day, frankly. And when they find out that he ordered folks into nursing homes and that killed COVID positive patients in the nursing homes, well, the USS Comfort sat empty in the Hudson, and the Javits Center had a fraction of its capacity, right? You talk about leadership mattering, right? In Florida, they've got twice the population. They've got a larger nursing home population. They've had far fewer deaths because the governor refused to put COVID positive patients into nursing homes. He set up field hospitals. He said, I'll be damned if they go back into nursing homes. Our governor did the exact opposite, and 8,000 people. 8,000 people. And what we now know, the governor's out there saying, oh, well, if the operators had followed our guidance, but a tape has come out that we obtained through Jack's investigation and Oprah, in which when the health department is giving the nursing home operators that guidance, saying to separate, saying to do this, the nursing home operators are saying, we can't do that. That won't ever work. Finally, one of them says, after 45 minutes of discussion, we've released the tape, it's on our Facebook page, it's on our website, 45 minutes of conversation, nonstop talking. One of the nursing home operators says, just to be clear, if we'll do this, if you're forcing us to, but people will die. People who would not otherwise have died will die. JR, there's silence. There's 30 seconds of silence from the health department before somebody else asks another question. So they knew it wasn't going to work. That's why they gave them immunity so they can't be sued. And now that it hasn't worked and all those people died, they're pointing the finger at the operators. It's just not right. And when people find that out, we know it's why it's the ad that Jack's running, that we're running now. When people find that out, a much different view of Governor Murphy, that the motor vehicles, unemployment, I mean, the list goes on, but that's a big one. And the other thing that matters, because you're right, people do say, well, it's a blue state. It's a blue state. And so you've got no shot. Murphy's going to win. It's a blue state. Well, not in 40 years, and you know this, not in 40 years has our state reelected a Democratic governor. Not Jim Florio, not Jim McGreevey, not John Corzine. The other important historical fact is that over that same time period, every time a Democrat took the White House, you know what New Jersey did the very next year? Elect a Republican governor. There's a reason for that, right? Independents, unaffiliateds, they want checks and balances. And it motivates Republicans to turn out. So we need to do that, and we need to keep those two trends continuing. But don't think for 1 second. By the way, in that same time period, every Republican governor has had 2 terms. So it's razor thin the first time out. Razor thin. Tom Kean Jr., 1,800 votes. Christy Todd Whitman, 1%. Chris Christie just shy of 2%. We got to work this, and we're going to win it. But it's like a baseball season. You don't win it in April and May. You win it in October. And that's what we're going to do.
That's right. And the other thing that we're going up against is the fact that the multimedia or the major media sources in New Jersey all skew left. NJ.com, Insider New Jersey, the Global New Jersey Globe. It goes to the nightly news from Trenton on Channel 23. It goes on and on and on. And this is what our challenge is to get the word out about Jack being the superior candidate, because he understands and he respects the Constitution. He knows it. He knows that the Constitution is the vehicle by which the people's natural rights are protected, not the fiats and the decrees of what Phil Murphy thinks is best. And so this is our challenge with the New Jersey Constitutional Republic, is providing media a facility or to facilitate getting the people to know who you are as the campaign manager for Jack Ciattarelli. And then also getting the word out on Jack, of course. So we're up against Goliath in many instances, but we know the final end of that story.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. I think I'd rather be David. But look, you're not wrong. There are certainly those who wear their bias on their sleeve. Some of the ones you mentioned, I think, are fairer than others. Look, even in this, just recently, this past Sunday, Tom Moran, who it makes no bones about being a devout liberal, took the governor to task on his misogyny and record and phony record, he called it, when it comes to women issues and the Me Too movement, right? When you talk about ignoring the rape allegations on his campaign, you talk about the toxic work environment, and most horrifically, this Edna Mann prison, where it's not only a horrific human rights abuses, but an expensive problem for New Jersey. They just settled the case for $21 million pre the most recent January assault, a spree of assaults for which 4 or 5 now officers have already had charges brought against them, and over 30 officers have been let go or suspended. And yet Commissioner Hicks, despite a federal report saying it was that the horrific abuses were occurring there, stays in power. And Governor Murphy won't fire him. He won't resign. And the legislature, here's what I think is, and then I'll stop, but I think this is particularly hypocritical.
Mhm.
Every Democratic legislator said that this guy should resign or be fired. Gene Stanfield had the wherewithal to figure out that they could all vote to impeach him. And only a handful they have joined on, and the others have slow walked it. So
Mhm.
put your money where your mouth is, right? Are you all talk? Or are you going to do something? And so, Gene Stanfield, the Assemblywoman Gene Stanfield, former sheriff running in the 8th district, deserves credit. And Jack has been a leader of that too. Jack has been out calling for this guy to be, Commissioner Hicks to be fired or resign. And certainly if Jack were governor, the guy would have been fired. I mean, you can't have this type of abuse and mismanagement and keep your job. It's about accountability.
Yes.
If you ran your own
Yes.
small business like Jack did, you got to be accountable.
No question about it, Eric. And we have to remember that for 2 centuries, our nation has gone through various smallpox epidemics that occurred in the early stages of our history. We had a civil war. We had World War I, World War II. We've had the Spanish flu, the swine flu. We've had SARS, and never before in our history did we suspend constitutional rights. But with the COVID-19 epidemic, that's exactly what the governor of New Jersey has done. He suspended the first constitutional rights of assembly, the freedom of assembly, as well as the freedom of religious expression. And we look in our Constitution and we say that people are inherently given the right to acquire, to possess, and to maintain property. And that means business ownership and acquiring money and property. And we've seen that 30% of the small businesses in New Jersey no longer exist. Now, this is what we have to get out to the public, Eric, that the people don't understand that this governor has suspended the Constitution for an epidemic. And they used 2 pieces of legislation, 1942 Disaster Recovery Act, 2009 Emergency Powers Act. Those pieces of legislation, Eric, do not trump the Constitution. The Constitution is the law of the state and the law of the land. And yet that's precisely what Phil Murphy has done in telling people they can't gather together, they can't go to church, and that they can't open their businesses up or make a living for themselves, all in the false facade of public health. And this is what needs to be brought out to the people of New Jersey, that Jack Ciattarelli would never suspend a constitutional right.
Well, look, I think Jack has said this well. We have the ability to save both lives and livelihoods. When we talk about equal application, I think that we've seen it elsewhere with some of these other governors when you talk about polling, but inconsistency seems to be one of the great criticisms. You're right from the constitutional aspect in a lot of ways, but more so, when you own on a more human level. I talked to guys who own a guy who owns 2 children's shoe stores. He's thinking, well, wait a second, Walmart is selling children's shoes and I've got to be closed. And then when the governor's EO came out that said children's supplies, stores that sold children's supplies could open, he opened both stores. One was in a town that happened to be run by Republicans. The other was in a town that happened to be run by Democrats. The town where he was run by Republicans, now he was doing everything right? He was trying to save lives as well. He was taking appointments, bringing people in, staying socially distant. That was his choice. The town run by Republicans, no problem. In the town run locally by Democrats, he got a knock on his door that the town attorney had interpreted the executive order so that his store didn't qualify as children's supplies, despite the fact that he was selling children's shoes. So you talk about equal application, and that's been a real problem here. And when you talk about a third of our small businesses being closed, it's not just owners, although, look, Jack's family with 1 high school diploma bought and operated the bar and restaurant around the corner from their house. 1 high school diploma between his parents. His mother would like us to say she was the one with the high school diploma. But, that's who are owning a lot of these businesses. It's small family owned businesses. They pour their heart and their souls, their blood, their sweat, and their tears. They stay up at night thinking about how they can make payroll, and their dream has closed. It's also dishwashers, waiters, bartenders, people who work the cash register, hostesses. It's a host, this economy is a host of people, many of whom, by the way, not only have seen their dreams foreclosed or stalled, but then when they go to apply for the unemployment benefits that they paid into, they've waited months or even years, or even a year to get their unemployment because the system that was there was so antiquated, which Jack had been calling for an improvement of for years, was so antiquated and behind and bureaucratic that these folks
Mhm.
were left without recourse and without support when they needed it most. And so this pandemic certainly tested, you're right, not only our constitutional limits and bedrocks, but also the functionality of our government, whether it was DMV, waiting hours online there, and the competency, the core competency of our
Mhm.
state government. And on any number of factors, they failed brutally. And that's a record that Governor Murphy is going to have to answer for as we get into the fall, into the election season.
There's no question. And Eric, we challenged the constitutionality of executive orders to begin with. You won't find them in our state constitution. You will not find executive orders mentioned in the federal constitution. And what it has done, it's allowed Phil Murphy to take this unilateral act of power. And he has more, I believe it's at 238 or 240. He continues the emergency going on and on and on. He says he's using science, but he's not evaluating the science accurately. But he has instituted more executive orders in 4 years than Chris Christie did in 8 already.
Yep.
Eric,
Look, it's clear the only, yeah, it's clear that the science that Governor Murphy cares most about is political science. And
yes,
that's clear. There's no science to yep, the political expedience. You're right. There's the science cuts the other way when it comes to important things like opening our schools. There's no science that at 10 o'clock suddenly this virus gets worse. What's the difference between 35 and 25 one day or the next, on St. Patrick's Day or the day after? Pulling the rug out from under folks right before the 4th of July when they'd ordered food and brought staff in and done the cleaning. I mean, there are simple things that we can do to make life easier for our small businesses. We have a small business economy here.
Mm-hmm.
So you're absolutely right. It's a real problem. And then the other thing that's ridiculous is that they refuse. I mean, the folks in the legislature have called for a limit, right? Pretty rational, reasonable, common sense limit to how long executive orders can last. And the Democrats have refused to even put it up or consider it, never mind support it. Why can't he come back after 30 days or 60 days and say, or a week, right? And say, here's why I need to continue executive order. Why have a legislature if it's not going to function in times of emergency? It's just, it's an unfortunate reality, and we need to get back to regular order and good governance.
That's right. And of course, I've talked to Jack about, the whole response that Phil Murphy's given, and some of the ideas that he would formulate if he was in the same position, which would be much more amicable to a broader base of voters in New Jersey. And he would be much more representative of all of New Jerseyans, because as you know, what goes on in Hudson County is very different than what goes on down here in Cumberland and Salem County. And these all encompassing broad-based edicts, direct orders, need to be more geographically specified, and more local government is needed. And Jack is a big proponent, and he knows all the people who serve in local government already throughout the state. He's created a great rapport with all the Republican organizations. He goes throughout the state. No man has worked harder in getting to know Republicans in New Jersey than Jack Ciattarelli. And he has gone to each one of the organizations. They know him. That's why he's so beloved and well liked. But he understands that in a situation similar to what Murphy's been exploiting, I would say, Jack would rely more on the local government, the input from the local representatives, whereas Phil Murphy has only worked within his own very little Eiffel Tower there at Drumwacket. So
I think
there's a big difference.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I think you're exactly.
I go on.
I know. So good. I think you're exactly right, and I don't want to keep you, but I think you're exactly right. I mean, it's to your point earlier. Jack's willing to go anywhere and listen to anybody. I also think it's part of the problem is that Governor Murphy's not from New Jersey. He's never served at the local level, never had a business here, didn't go to school here, so he doesn't really have an understanding of how it works. And this vaccine rollout has made that evident. The other thing I hear, and that makes me that drives me nuts, and I know it bothers Jack, is when we're in places like your county or Atlantic County or elsewhere, Salem, Cumberland, we hear, "Don't forget us down here." And that just shouldn't be the case. And no candidate has spent more time in those counties than Jack has. And we're not going to forget about anybody. And we've got specific plans. And Jack will be in Atlantic City on Sunday, Saturday and Sunday, to talk about his vision for that state or for that city. And today put out a statement about state takeover. I mean, really, the state that gave us all of these problems we've talked about wants to continue to rule Atlantic City, and to what end? Are they better off? And so we're going to, Jack is going to continue that and to listen to everybody. And as governor, we'll do the same, and not rule by fiat. You're right. In his ivory tower. One of the moments, Governor Murphy closed parks. Remember that? Closed our parks. Time when mental health and physical activity were most vital because we've all been locked in our homes. And Tammy Murphy, the first lady, posts a picture that day of the governor running on his treadmill inside his home gym, which looked nicer than any gym I've ever been in. It's easy to make decisions that affect the rest of the state when you have that type of gym in your basement. Not everybody has that. And I don't think this governor regularly understands that.
That's right, Eric. And one more thing I'd like to say about Jack is that he understands the difference between principled Republican ideals that are derived from the Declaration of Independence, that Abraham personified, that Abraham Lincoln used to really create the ideological and philosophical base of the Republican Party. Jack understands those and believes in those, but he also understands progressivism. He understands the influence of Wilson and the administrative and the bureaucratical state that has completely taken over New Jersey government. And that's very encouraging, that he does know the difference between both, and that he does know that the best and most true justice can be brought about through these Republican principles going back to the Declaration of Independence. And that is something that the people need to know, especially those who question Jack's conservatism. Jack is a conservative in the respect that he goes back to the Declaration of Independence. He goes back to the Constitution. And he's not looking for something that may happen years down the road. He understands human nature. He understands the fixed principles that guide our Constitution and the Declaration. So the people out there say, well, is Jack really a conservative? He is a Republican, and Republicans are genuinely conservative, as Lincoln was in going back to look at the Declaration of Independence and make it relevant again today. So I just want to let those voters out there who may question Jack's conservatism. He is indeed a conservative, but he is also a moderate in the respect that, considering the issue, he will take all sides, listen to everyone, and then he will build a good case to defend natural rights based on consensus. And that's what he has the ability to do.
Well said. Well said. Jack is certainly a conservative, common sense conservative. And like I said, he's won in elections because he went everywhere and listened to everybody. And that's what we'll do. That's what he'll do as governor. And that's what this campaign will do throughout the campaign. And so anybody who wants to contact us, get a hold of us on our website or our Facebook page, or reach out to the campaign by phone, or come on by and talk to us, because we'll be out and about in the state. And I'm always open to chat with anybody, particularly you, JR.
Well, Eric, it's been great. And now the website is Jack4Gov,
Jack,
correct?
the number 4 NJ. Jack, the number 4 NJ.
Jack4NJ.
And Jack 4 NJ. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We do hope you follow us. I think you'll like what you see out of this campaign. Tell us when you don't.
Yep.
But I do think that,
look, chats are great.
You hear directly from Jack. This is an opportunity to engage with a candidate that can win and can beat Phil Murphy. And more than that, can fix a state that desperately, desperately needs it. And, a CPA man, not a career politician who believes in term limits and the like, is the type of guy, and you're right, who emulates our great Abraham Lincoln, is the type of guy that I think we need.
That's right, Eric. And I want to thank you for joining me today. It's really been a great conversation.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
And I do want to say, Eric, that we have to remind the voters of New Jersey, first and foremost, Phil Murphy is a Boston Red Sox fan. Jack Ciattarelli is a diehard New York Yankees fan. So is Jake, my buddy, his son.
That's
and
right.
Remember that when it comes to voting, leave the Red Sox up there in Fenway. This is Yankee. They can have Red Sox Nation, but we got Yankee Universe. All right. So never forget that. And Jack knows that too.
Yep. I wish.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you. Thank you, JR. And I look forward to being back with you again soon. Talk to you soon.
Thank you all for joining us. Share this and like it and share with others. And remember what Lincoln said, liberty for all. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, JR.